Hello and welcome to FrostBytes, where logistics and tech meet a fresh perspective. I'm your host and co-founder of PAXAFE, Ilya Preston. And today, for episode 3, we're joined by a true leader in global supply chain innovation, Jeff Lander. In this episode, we'll not only dive into his incredible career, but also his perspectives on technology, overcoming industry challenges, and what's next for cold chain logistics. Jeff has over a decade of experience in cold chain distribution within the pharmaceutical industry and is currently the director of global logistics engineering at Moderna. During his time at Moderna, Jeff has been instrumental in supporting the commercial distribution of over 1 billion doses of the Moderna Spikevax vaccine worldwide. Some areas of specialization for him include the creation of global shipping validation frameworks, cold chain stability design for finished products, temperature monitoring and shipment visibility, and serving as a subject matter expert during regulatory inspections and audits. Prior to Moderna, Jeff was a senior consultant at Lean Biologics and cold chain manager at Accutech Packaging, where he was responsible for the life cycle management and implementation of cold chain packaging across global CMO and 3PL sites. Jeff, we're thrilled to have you on the show. If for nothing else, it's because you're always going to shoot us straight.
Hey, Ilya, great to see you. Great to be here.
So before we get into your background, we want to start off with a shock to the system, as we usually do, with a segment that we call Jeff's Hot Take. So Jeff, what is one opinion that you have about the cold chain logistics industry that others might find controversial or contrarian?
Oh, put me on the spot here. Ilya, I'd have to say from a hot take perspective, I really haven't seen a lot of true innovation, I'd say, in the cold chain logistics and kind of distribution space, probably in the last few years. And that's even from a shipping system perspective, even some of the IoT devices, or even kind of the real-time platforms. I think from a groundbreaking, I remember when the adoption of VIPs or vacuum insulated panels, was kind of widely commercialized and really opened up a lot of capabilities and flexibilities, for shipping and shipping optimization. But truly, in kind of talking with people in the industry and kind of even seeing other products, there's a lot of buzzwords out there, IoT, visibility, insights, but in terms of like a true groundbreaker, I haven't seen anything that's been, truly earth shattering. When I look back to even, like Amazon can take a pair of socks and can give you better insights on when it would arrive versus even some of the technology that we have today. And we're talking about extremely expensive and sensitive, cold chain product. So I would say that's probably my hot take. Not to say that things aren't out there or things aren't on the horizon, but I think right now that there's been no great way to integrate. It's a bit disjointed in terms of capabilities. So I'm eagerly awaiting for the time where I see all of those in kind of one single source, maybe platform, or even advances in like even sustainable packaging that's been adopted. That is kind of the true test case for it that actually will pass kind of a pharmaceutical validation, so to speak.
Yeah. No, those are great insights. I think you need one of those change my mind signs. What would you say? So specifically within, supply chain and maybe even deeper going into like visibility, you mentioned, disintegrated systems or lack of full integration of data. Like what would you want to see if you had a magic wand and you could drive one critical quantum leap in innovation in supply chain visibility? What would that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a visibility platform, right? I would like something, that would be fully packaging and device agnostic, right? And I think there's some difficulty there because you've got some IP, both from passive packaging vendors and also some from IoT devices, that some of that information sharing is probably not as willing as it is today. But ideally, in a perfect world, a packaging and device agnostic platform that not only do I get kind of those predictive insights, but I also get dynamic insights across my supply chain, right? So let's say that I have a delay, across, a node, having the update, right? Ingesting ambient weather data in conjunction with thermal modeling from the shipper and giving me actually real-time insights on how to act, right? And I think that's really where the biggest issue right now is with IoT adoption and real-time visibility is I have all of this data. I don't know necessarily what to do with it, or is it really helping me when I've got a shipment in transit, right? So obviously there's some of that. Hey, I want to know even before it leaves my 3PL or my dock, but in reality, that's not always the case. And I think really where that fails today is giving me real-time insights on what do I do, how long it will last, right?
Yeah.
So you've got typically, and just from a pharmaceutical validation perspective from shipping, you typically take your worst case perspective in a lab or an operational qualification.
Mhm.
Reality, when you go into the field, that box will likely last potentially sometimes double what you validated it for.
Yeah.
But then I'm standing to my qualified duration, and then all of a sudden I'm intercepting and I'm losing product, or I don't have that dynamic relationship to say, hey, you know what, let it ride. That 1 day delay or even 2 day delay may not be impactful to my product.
And do you think that lack of kind of real time insight or operation ability is a product of the lack of data share across the ecosystem, or do you think it's more of a technological gap of technological capability to bring it all together, or something else?
No, it's a great question, right? And I think it's both. I think it's a combination of multiple factors, and I think both are at play. And one of which is when you look at kind of a centralized control tower platform, and you look at the market for kind of a cold chain centric, just dedicated to cold chain, it's actually very small, right? So then when you look at the number of pharmaceutical users, you've kind of broken up into typically high value, low volume shipments, or high volume, maybe lower value that I'm not necessarily doing kind of IoT or real time tracking on that.
Yep.
So then when you look at typically kind of the pricing model, there's usually like a SaaS fee, and that's annually. So when you build out, there's a long sell cycle to bring on a pharmaceutical company to adopt into the platform. You've got CSV validation, you've got all the 21 CFR Part 11 compliance, depending on what your use case is, right? So you've got a long sell cycle and a very niche market. And when you look at the opportunity cost or the potential revenue generator, that's not a large market. So what you end up having a lot of these companies that need to appeal to a larger audience to be able to generate revenue. So whether that's, from a security perspective, whether that's food, whether that's consumer goods or high value consumer electronics. And when you start to generalize your capabilities, then I lose some of the core stuff that I'm interested from a cold chain perspective. So I think it's a dilution of capabilities based on kind of having a wider appeal. But I also think that as you create, and this is another buzzword, right? AI, machine learning, algorithm, right? All the buzzwords that you can throw on a bingo card, right? So I think there's also potentially an opportunity for data sharing across companies to, essentially make that model smarter out of the get-go. Because again, it's one of those where you've got machine learning, but you need to have inputs into the machine to be able to make it predictive. So if I've got my shipments in a vacuum and X pharmaceutical company's got their shipments in a vacuum, why cannot, there's nothing IP related to that. Why can't we share that and both benefit or benefit as an industry?
Absolutely. Yeah, like anonymized data, anonymized benchmarking.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Makes sense. So let's switch gears now to your journey in a segment we call Jeff's Cold Start. You've obviously had an incredible path through packaging, through consulting, and now into pharma. Can you tell us a bit about that journey?
Sure. I got into this industry or cold chain completely by accident. So completely by chance. So actually, when I started at Aggregated, many years ago, I was actually hired as an industrial solutions specialist related for like 3M products. So I was like the technical specialist related to like double coated tapes, adhesives, packaging tapes, personal safety items. So I would accompany, like a sales rep on a call, and then if they had specific technical questions related to like a 3M product, then I would come in and kind of do the demo and talk about kind of the specifics related to the tech specs.
Yep.
There was this one particular opportunity where we went into an account, was actually shipping reagents and peptides, and thought it was actually an opportunity for a 3M product. And the guy asked the question, do you guys do anything with cold chain? At the time, I had no idea what cold chain was. I instead of saying no, I said, okay, well, tell me what you're looking for. Maybe it's something that we can help you with. And long or the short, he gave me his requirements. I went back, started making a few phone calls, did some research. And long or the short, we were able to offer him, it was a dry ice solution. We were able to offer him, a solution that met his needs. It was kind of benefited the company financially. And it was, for the most part, it was kind of an easy sell.
Yeah.
And a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, maybe there's something to this kind of cold chain area. And it was right around the time that dimensional weight shipping had changed from UPS and FedEx. So there was a time where you could take, a pair of socks and you can put it in a box this big, and they would charge you for the actual weight for 1 pound. UPS and FedEx eventually got smarter and said, well, you know what? We're going to start cubing that box and take the higher of the two amounts.
That's right.
So then everybody, even, companies shipping to Amazon, but even pharmaceutical companies were getting sticker shock because they were getting charged an astronomical amount because now you're getting cubed out as opposed to actual weight.
Yeah.
So people started looking at, some of those costs a lot more closely. And what I had found was, I had a lot of conversations kind of up and down with companies in Boston, companies in Cambridge, pharmaceutical, carved out a niche within kind of the mail order specialty pharmacy, companies shipping like insulin, mail order fertility drugs, some of like the CVS Caremark kind of specialty drugs. And what I had found is, quite frankly, there wasn't a lot of innovation, or even some of the testing that they were providing, or some of the regulations that they were being held to were very lax. So did a lot of research and kind of like, found a lot of mentors kind of in the industry, stood up a testing lab with a partner, and created essentially the cold chain division at Accutech. So that was kind of, looking through in-house testing, brought in-house polyurethane manufacturing with two-part molded foam, was responsible for vendor sourcing, setting up the kitting, delivery, so end-to-end, soup to nuts. But for me, what attracted it to me, it wasn't an exact science. And that was what was fun about it, is I dug more in. I mean, I was reading scholarly articles at night, an idea would pop in my head, and I would go on my phone at 11:30 at night. My wife's looking over at me like, "Are you crazy?" And then she would just turn back and go to sleep. But it's just the mind was always churning. I always had kind of like the engineering mindset, and kind of a lot of it, initially self-taught, baseline, met people in the industry, kind of just had some of those engaging conversations. Yeah. And then kind of carved out a niche within mail order specialty pharmacy. Like I was mentioning, there was a lot of kind of, there was, back then, and luckily, the regulations had kind of improved drastically since then. But, I used to call it the Goldilocks theory when I looked at some of the regulations, right? And I swear to you, the regulation on a particular accreditation, the product must arrive not too warm, not too cold, but within the right temperature. And that was it for kind of cold chain requirements. And it was like, okay, that's really interesting. But luckily that's changed since then. And then, so that was kind of non-FDA, joined as a consultant with Lean Biologic to support a lot of change management. There was some cell and gene and just kind of implementation of shipping systems, learning more on the quality management side, shipping validation, PQ protocols, reports, and then landed at Moderna where I am today. But it was always it's never the same approach. Yeah. And that's what drives me about cold chain. And that's even for passive packaging, that's for IoT adoption. There's a lot of gray area within it.
Yeah.
That's an area where you can kind of get creative and kind of thrive, obviously meeting quality and compliance, but also there's some ambiguity, which actually makes it fun and creative.
That makes sense. So I crossed from industry into consulting. Obviously opened my eyes considerably on how companies solve similar problems differently. You did the opposite. You went from packaging and consulting into industry, into pharma. Yeah. What's one thing that surprised you the most about your arrival into pharma, and what's the one thing you would change now, having been within pharma for a number of years?
Yeah, no, I think the one thing that I would obviously change is we're and rightfully so, right? I think that we're extremely risk averse as an industry, right? And I think that there's a balance between managing the right amount of risk versus what's truly an acceptable level of risk. And and obviously within kind of shipping validation space, it is kind of per company policy. And I think kind of related in the industry is that change, and you hear the words change or change management or change control, and everybody shudders, right? And then all of a sudden you could have a lot of almost a no-brainer for either a platform or a device, and it takes forever to get things done. and it's very slow, and at times it's very clunky. And I think that's one thing that I would certainly change. The one thing that also I think really annoys me is that and I can speak across just some other companies here, is that very siloed, right? And in terms of, if you're going to have an optimum kind of logistics or cold chain distribution, you really need to look at end-to-end total cost of ownership. If I'm looking in silos or buckets, and if I've procurement that doesn't understand kind of the value, or looking at logistics spend, you've got somebody that's interested in packaging spend in a logistics budget, and then, but you're also getting incentivized on those KPIs. As part of your pay and your compensation is based on, hey, saving money out of this potential budget, when in reality we're incentivizing the wrong things. You should be incentivizing total cost of ownership, as opposed to, hey, here's my packaging spend, here's my logistics spend, and here's my IoT spend.
Yeah.
When again, at the end of the day, if you want to truly optimize process, you look at total cost of ownership. So that's certainly one of the things that I was very surprised when I saw how siloed it was, and also an area where we need to do better to understand, if we really want to be innovative, then we need to look at the end-to-end process and not individual silos or buckets.
Oh, I can't tell you how frustrating that was during my time in consulting, where, you'd talk to different functions. Each function would be incentivized by a different KPI. You're working with the executive team, and the executive team at the end cares about reduction in product loss, faster decision-making, optimized processes, but everybody's got their own small bubble of KPIs, and just feels like nobody really wants to back up and look at the bigger picture for the greater good of the organization, right? It's competing priorities, competing silos, and I agree with you there.
Yeah, and you get so many people, right? So many hands are in the pot. Somebody leaves, somebody takes a new role, and then it's almost like you start back to square one, right? Somebody of that cross-functional team or the core team leaves, somebody comes in, or somebody else, and then the person leading that project leaves, and then it goes back to square one. Or it's one of those where it's really a touchy subject for me, because it's like, that's kind of the antithesis of innovation there, is that, this is the way we've always done it, and unless it's really a huge major problem, I don't want to go through change or the change management process. And it's like, for what? Like, but
my favorite quote is the Henry Ford quote. If I would have asked the customer what they wanted, they would have said I have faster horse. And it's
yeah. I love that. Yeah, it's a great call
out. So let's talk about some fires in our next segment. So hot challenges. Can you give us a 2-minute, just kind of a high level overview? I know you spent a number of years in supply chain. I know that has come with significant challenges. Could you share one of the bigger hurdles you faced, whether it's implementation of real-time visibility, navigating a global pandemic? Kind of what's been the toughest test of your career?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's certainly been a ton of challenges, right? I think for specifically as part of the pandemic, right, it's been the cold chain infrastructure, right, so at least for the Moderna product, which is -20. And if you go back to prior to the pandemic, -20 shipping really didn't exist. You might have had, there was one company that I knew of that had a -20 product, and it was a very niche product. They had just developed it for a specific customer. It wasn't even like wide scale commercially adopted. And the problem is the existing cold chain infrastructure, especially for -20, didn't exist. And then, it's not as simple, and you couldn't put it on, could not be shipped on dry ice. And you need very specialized equipment. You need a very, specialized walk-ins for storage. So trying to build trying to distribute while building the infrastructure in parallel was certainly no easy task. The other thing too is when you start and you've got the difference, the delta T, or the difference in temperature, when I start to pull out -20 PCMs, and how am I ensuring performance in my passive shippers, when I'm, and getting people around the head that you cannot handle this in the same way that you would handle a traditional 2 to 8 or even some of the -70 products. So it's really building that infrastructure, and then having to get creative with either blast freezers kind of on chassis, things of that nature, where you needed to essentially kind of build the you need to build the infrastructure at local partners, but also in parallel be mobile and flexible and adaptable while still getting product out. So that was and we're still wrestling out with it. Is a bigger infrastructure.
Yep.
but I think the need for -20 storage is not going away, and there's still a lack. And even further down the supply chain, as you see it, when you start getting into wholesalers, distributors, that it was new. So
makes a ton of sense, Jeff. So
yeah.
I know this next segment's going to be fun because I know you always speak your mind, and this is actually my favorite part of the podcast. It's time for our lightning round called Hot, Cool, or Cold. Okay. So tell me if you're bullish, neutral, or pessimistic on each of the following subjects in 15 to 30 seconds or less. All right. Okay. So starting off, real-time IoT devices.
I'd say neutral. Quite frankly, I think that you've got a lot of good devices out there. The problem is, I think that we could do better to make devices that are either more cost effective and also more scaled down to maybe what some of the capabilities are. Typically, a lot of these IoT devices just throw a bunch of functionality in there that I don't need, and they drive the cost up, battery life. So I'm neutral on it. Obviously, it's a technology that we need, but I think we need to do a better job anticipating what the market needs and what the customer needs.
So when you say boiling it down, just like GPS and temperature.
Yeah, because sometimes you get shock, you get humidity, you get a lot of like features in there. You lose payload space because they're too thick. Yeah. It's a whole kind of trickle down effect. Light sensing, is it easy for the customer to read? If you want to have this at scale, the customer needs to be able to read it and understand it at a wide scale. Like I need to be able to send it to my mother and have her be able to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. How about on the other side of the spectrum, passive data loggers? Are they here to stay or are they going away?
Yeah, I think they're here to stay. I think it's almost like styrofoam. They're tried, they're true. I think this industry very tough to change. Some people very comfortable. They're easy to read, easy to download. You don't get the real time insight. Sometimes that's not required. Yeah. So I don't think passive data loggers are going anywhere anytime soon.
How about lane validation and lane risk assessment? Is it a compliance step or is it value add?
I would say it's both. It's definitely a compliance step, but I think there's value add because you can change the conversation with your 3PL partners. I think it's really a KPI play where I can look and then measure performance as opposed to my 3PL partner coming with their KPIs. I can change the conversation to say that, hey, based on the lane risk assessment, if I have the insights, then I want to change the game and say, hey, have a two-way conversation as opposed to, hey, you're presenting KPIs and I don't know exactly what you're presenting me.
100%, and use that as a driver to improve your SOPs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned it in your opening. You specifically said device agnostic. So I'm interested for control tower specifically. The device agnostic piece, is it vital to be device agnostic, or can you get a control tower from your LSP?
I think it's truly. I think it's really important to be device agnostic because I think from a true, from a scale, depending on a region perspective, depending on you've got, players that do well in different regions, either from a cellular connectivity standpoint, from an availability standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from a capability standpoint. So I want the ability to pick and choose depending on my use case, where my final mile versus my primary distribution may depend on my lane, may depend on the value. So I think being tied to one provider, there hasn't been a suite of products. There hasn't been global availability of one provider. So, and also from a business continuity plan. So I think being device and packaging agnostic is vital. It's a must.
Okay. Sustainability, check mark, or does the industry have a genuine caring for sustainability?
This should have been the hot take, right? I mean,
yeah.
I honestly, I think that people really do care about it, but I think in the end of the day, when moving the needle and investigating it, I think it's really a check the box exercise. I think I'm not saying that people don't care about it, sure, but I think that it's one of those where I haven't seen as much on the sustainability side that I thought I would. So I think one of those, it's people do care about it, but when push comes to shove, I think it's a check the box.
This next one is, you could probably add into that same bucket of hot takes, but Gen AI in temperature controlled logistics, is it a fad or is it ready for prime time?
I don't think it's ready for prime time. I don't think that people really understand and kind of know how to use it, right? I think it's one of those where it's a buzzword, right? It's hey, it's a buzzword. I know that I need it. I don't know why that I need it, but it's cool. It's in. We should be investigating this. And I think there's definitely a use case. But I think in terms of, I think there needs to be education first on kind of
Mhm.
how I use it, why I use it, what's the value of it.
100%.
When people start their IoT, vision, they don't know where to start. So now you're adding advanced functionality that if I don't even know where I'm starting, why do I care about all the features and benefits?
Yeah. Yep. All right. Last one. And I think I know what you're going to say on this one, but supply chain, cost center or value driver?
With the appropriate visibility platform, I think that it's a value driver. I think there is a value. I think there's definitely value. But again, it comes down to how do you use the right tools, right? It can be very much a cost center, but if you have the right tools and the right insights in play, then very much it can be a differentiator. But it comes down to the education and the use case. And a lot of people don't spend the time to understand the use case. And I don't want to say that they don't spend the time. It's just a matter of like, if I don't know the tools in and out, I don't know what my problem statement is. I don't know what value that I'm generating. And it's not necessarily one, or the other. There's multiple use cases, but if you're not spending the time to drive true value, then it becomes a cost center. But I think there is true differentiator if used correctly.
Makes perfect sense. So with regards to like future predictions, our listeners love hearing what's next from the industry insiders. So if you're looking out, and this used to be a question around 3 years, 5 years. I think with technology, with pace of change in technology today, it's silly to look beyond 1 or 2 years. But looking, 1 or 2 years out, what trends or innovations do you envision reshaping the cold chain industry?
No, I think it comes down. I don't think that we're far away from a device and packaging agnostic platform, right? And I think you've got a lot of those. You've got a lot of companies out there that have bits and pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody will get smart and finally bolt everything together in kind of at least one platform where I can pull that in there. I don't think that's far away. It just doesn't exist today in a true, and where I can do data analysis and data automation and also have some of that dynamic insights in real time. There's bits and pieces, but it's a bit disjointed. I don't think that's far away. I think another one is I don't think that we're far away from having a device that's probably going to be hopefully a little more cost effective, that I can have a little more flexibility to do wider scale kind of visibility and IoT adoption, right? Maybe potentially on the final mile, right? I think it's one of those where right now if you can get the price point down, then you potentially could get rid of some of those chemical indicators or things of that nature, or like a taggler or electronic or even chemical indicators that, especially on the use case further downstream, that education, what is your product lost because somebody opens the box, they go put it away and they come back and said, oh, now it's an indicator. So I don't think you're far away to see kind of a lower cost device with pared down functionality. I think that the device manufacturers are listening and saying form factor, easy to use, go, no go, light sense, essentially, thin form factor and no customer interaction required, right?
Sure. Well, so on the form factor piece, we've been hearing, I think, from the industry, at least for the last probably 3, 4, 5 years, of this promise of a label, right?
Mm-hmm.
And thin form factor, $5 a shipment or less. And obviously we're still not there, but do you think that's feasible to get to in the next couple of years?
I think there's a lot of aspirations.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll get there in a couple of years from a label perspective. And I guess it depends on what temperatures and kind of what you're looking at, right? I think for us, as we look at kind of -20, that's a whole different stress in terms of battery life and reading intervals. It depends on what you're using it for. I don't think it's impossible. It depends on your use case. Are you using it from a quality and release perspective? How often do you want the data? What do you plan on doing with the data? There's a lot of questions.
Sure.
That I can spend a whole podcast with you talking about. What do you need to consider even just for the label and what your use case is. So is it possible? Yes, but it really depends on what your temperature is, what your use case, what are you expecting out of it?
Yeah.
Well,
maybe on that note, to the extent that Moderna uses IoT or considers using IoT in your network, what kinds of things do you look at today where devices are, by and large, very similar? The hardware is very similar. Maybe the services are different. The companies are different. What do you typically look at in your device selection process when you're looking at?
Yeah. So, obviously what comes first is kind of the the quality and kind of compliance requirements. So we have kind of a basic user requirement spec based on device properties that we have to meet just from a quality and compliance aspect. Then it probably moves into the and that's where it comes into a couple different factors, right? There's a UI perspective, there's a availability perspective, there's performance perspective that we would do some internal testing on, and ping rates and accuracy, battery life. One of the things, especially for frozen, is making sure that, hey, we're getting the performance, we're getting the battery life, which is obviously a hot topic related to devices in and of itself. Are we getting the appropriate uploads? Or their cellular connectivity that we're evaluating?
Yep.
But those are more on the technical side.
Yeah.
If the device, depending on the use case, the device needs to be thin, easy to use. We've implemented something on the final mile in the US. It's a very thin device. It has a light sense, and it's either green or red when the customer opens the box. So we use that for final mile, and again, it gives insights. We were able to reduce our intercept rate from 1.9% to 0.3% by just adding that device in there for shipments. Excellent. That gave us the dynamic insights to say, hey, we have a delay, we have real-time data, we have the ambient data, ingesting it. Don't intercept it, let it ride, because here's the forecast of weather data. So but there's a whole and again, it depends on where you're on the supply chain, but at least as we've been, our IoT journey focus on customer experience, and then also really the ease of use on a UI perspective.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, and to that point, so obviously, on a shipment by shipment basis, I think that's a lot of what the promise of IoT can get you, is that,
right,
that will bring those intercept rates, intervening and salvaging products, et cetera. What are you doing in the aggregate to actually drive forward-looking decisions, if anything? Are you finding a lot of value of aggregating that data and using that towards?
Actually, it comes down to, so it wasn't necessarily, it was dynamic for kind of the use case, but now we're actually aggregating that data and looking at service level optimization. Because right now we've exclusively shipped next day air, where opens up the box based on the performance and based on some of the delays. Like, for instance, we had shipments that we did Friday for Saturday delivery, but if you don't code Saturday delivery in the UPS or FedEx, it goes to Monday. So that's obviously that's a 3-day shipment. So now, based on the performance, we've been able to aggregate that data and say, hey, we feel comfortable looking at a 2-day or even a 2-day air, or even a 2-day ground point. Yep. And just again, from a logistics point. So that's how we're kind of looking from an optimization standpoint. We have the large data set and saying, okay, what do we feel comfortable with on what regions and what service level? So but again, it's one of those where that wasn't the original intended use case, but now that you have that data, you can build on additional use cases. So
100%. No, so Jeff, we've got about 2 minutes here.
Yep.
Before we wrap up, we'd love to hear about what we call a logistics legend story. So a time of either when you or a colleague went above and beyond to get the job done. Do you have something memorable that you can share?
Yeah, sure. So this was during the height of the pandemic, right? And we had an urgent shipment to make sure they were meeting a fill slot at a CMO in Europe. And at the time, we didn't have an animal embargo on the plane or on the airline. Mm-hmm. So at the last second, somebody books a flight with a dog, and we were going to get bumped on this critical shipment. Mm-hmm. So we're scrambling, going, oh, what do we do? This needs to get there. Like, we have a manufacturing slot. We're trying to get doses out as quickly as possible, manufacturing as quickly as possible. So in negotiation, our head of international logistics somehow brokered to buy the dog a first-class ticket to sit on the plane, so that way the shipment can continue on to the destination, right? And every time I go back, I mean, kudos for the ingenuity, but also I just think about the dog, like, hey, just chilling there in first class, like, hey, I kind of want to be the dog, right? I mean, but that for me was just like, that took the cake in terms of, okay, well, we need to figure out a solution. We can't get bumped. The height of the pandemic, there weren't other flights going on. It was very limited on flights. So dog's chilling in first class, getting food and drink service at no charge, and hey, the shipment went on. So that's
well, I will say, after seeing millions or tens of millions of air leg shipments running through our own platform, I don't know that I would fly my dog through cargo either. So, That's no, that's interesting. All right, Jeff. Thank you so much for
Yes.
sharing your journey and insights. To wrap up in one or two sentences or less, could you leave our listeners with one kind of final cool piece of advice? It could be career related, farmer related, supply chain focused. What's your biggest advice to anybody listening right now?
I would just say continue to network, and I do the same as well, especially in the industry, like open sharing, bring the industry together, continue to network. And there's a lot of companies, a lot of knowledge out there. Don't be afraid to kind of solicit, bounce ideas back. We have a very very collaborative industry that we can even further. So that's the last piece that I would leave us with.
That's right. Open source it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been great having you on. We'll talk soon. All right. And that's one cool rep for FrostBytes. Jeff, thank you for being here and for all the wisdom you've shared. To our listeners, thanks for continuing to tune in. Our first two episodes actually crossed 26,000 views and counting. So please, please, please keep it going. Don't forget to subscribe and stay connected for more insights from leaders in cold chain logistics. You can grab your copy of our IoT Maturity Curve ebook in the comments below, and our IoT deployment ebook in the comments below. And please follow us along and on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again.